There is a protein system that fits inside a parking space. It produces 350 pounds of harvestable food annually. It purchases no feed, it requires no veterinary care, it needs no fertilizer, no pesticide, no annual seed contract, no supply chain, and no permission from anyone to function. Once established, it restocks itself, it manages its own fertility, it filters its own water. It has been doing all of this continuously in communities that never stopped using it for over 4,000 years. American university researchers documented the yields in the 1950s. The studies were published, the numbers were verified. The institution that exists in every single county in the United States, specifically to deliver agricultural research to ordinary farmers, never taught it. A self-managing, self-restocking protein system that costs $500 to build and feeds a family for 20 years. The biology works, the science is published, the history is documented. So why has nobody told you it exists? This is integrated polyculture pond farming. For over 4,000 years, from the floodplains of China's Yellow River to the village landscapes that European travelers in the 1200s described as one of the defining features of Chinese civilization, it was the protein system that fed more human beings throughout recorded history than any other method ever devised. The system that kings studied, peasants built, and empires could not suppress because the biology was too simple and too powerful to require anyone's permission to work. The year is 475 BC, the Yu Kingdom, southern China. Late afternoon, and the light coming off the surface of Lake Taihu is the particular gold that happens when water has been alive long enough to carry depth. A man stands at the edge of a pond he has spent 3 years building. He is not a farmer by training. He is one of the most celebrated military strategists in Chinese history. His name is Fan Li, and he has just walked away from everything a man of his era was supposed to want. He helped King Guzhen of Yu defeat the state of Wu after 20 years of patient strategy, one of the most studied military campaigns in Chinese history. When it was over, the king offered him wealth, title, and position at court. He declined all of it, not out of modesty, out of understanding. Fan Li had spent 20 years watching what happened to people who built their security on systems controlled by other people. He had watched kingdoms collapse not because they lacked soldiers, but because they lacked food. He had watched populations starve, not because the land was barren, but because the knowledge of how to feed themselves from it had been consolidated in the hands of people who used that knowledge as leverage. He retired to the shores of Lake Taihu. He built ponds. He observed what the water already knew how to do. He wrote it down. The document he produced, the Yang Yu Jing, is the oldest known treatise on aquaculture in human history. It describes not just how to stock a pond, but how to design a living system, how to arrange species so that the waste of one becomes the food of another, how to work with the biological cycles that water and sunlight already drive rather than against them, how to build something that does not need you to keep it running once it is established. He understood something that his years of war had made undeniable. The most powerful thing a person can possess is a food system that does not depend on anyone else's permission to function. Not a king's favor, not a merchant supply chain, not an institution's approval, just water, biology, and patience. The smell of the pond in the early morning, green, alive, faintly mineral, the smell of productive water that has found its balance, was the smell of that independence made physical. He knew it the way a soldier knows the smell of ground before rain. It meant his family would eat. It meant that whatever happened in the kingdoms beyond his land, he had already solved the most fundamental problem any human being faces. He wrote it down so that anyone could do the same. Not just kings, not just scholars, anyone with a patch of low ground and the patience to let biology do what it has always done. That document survived wars, dynasties, and empires because the knowledge it contained was too valuable for any of them to afford to lose. The origin of pond aquaculture in China is not an invention, it is an observation.
Around 3500 BC, along the Yellow River, Neolithic farmers notice something after seasonal floods recede. Carp, trapped in low-lying depressions as the water pulls back, are surviving, thriving, reproducing. The farmers deepen the depressions, they reinforce the edges with clay. The fish stay. They can be harvested whenever food is needed. This is not yet farming. It is the recognition that the land already knows how to produce protein and that the farmer's job is to assist that process rather than force an alternative one. By the Shang dynasty, around 1600 BC, the practice has been formalized enough to enter the written record. Oracle bone inscriptions, the earliest known form of Chinese writing, reference fishing in the garden. Archaeologists now understand these references as documentation of managed fish ponds integrated directly into agricultural plots. The wealthy maintain ornamental ponds with golden koi. Peasants maintain working ponds with common carp. The knowledge is not elite, it is distributed across the full social spectrum. It feeds the court and the village simultaneously. Then, in the 7th century AD, something happens that will accidentally transform the entire system. The Tang Dynasty emperor's family name is Li. The common carp, the primary protein source for millions of Chinese farmers, is called Li Yu, the Li fish. Out of imperial decree, the farming of common carp is banned across the entire empire. What follows is one of the most productive agricultural accidents in human history. Forced to replace their primary protein source overnight, farmers begin experimenting with species they had previously ignored. Mud carp that feed on bottom sediments, silver carp that filter algae from the middle water column, grass carp that consumes surface vegetation, bighead carp that eats zooplankton suspended in the upper water. Each species occupying a different ecological niche, no competition, no waste, every part of the water column producing food simultaneously. The emperor's ban, intended as a restriction, accidentally creates the world's first true polyculture system, a stacked, self-regulating ecosystem more productive than anything that came before it. By the time European travelers are documenting Chinese innovations in the 1200s, they describe village fish ponds as a defining feature of the landscape. Some of these ponds are centuries old, still producing thousands of pounds of protein annually. Nobody adding feed, the ponds feeding themselves the way they always have. The knowledge crosses the Pacific eventually. In the 1950s and 1960s, fishery scientist H.S. Swingle at Auburn University in Alabama begins revisiting the ancient Chinese methods in controlled American conditions. Test ponds as small as 1,000 square feet, stocked with native species, channel catfish and bluegill, managed using polyculture principles drawn from 4,000 years of documented Chinese practice. The results are published, and they are unambiguous. Up to 350 pounds of harvestable protein from 1,000 square feet annually, nearly double the yield of a quarter-acre of cattle pasture, using 1/10 of the space, with almost zero purchased inputs. The studies are cited. The momentum stops.
The Auburn University findings did not disappear because they were wrong. Every researcher who examined them reached the same conclusion. The biology worked. The yields were real. The system was reproducible. They disappeared because of where agricultural knowledge travels in America and who funds that journey. The USDA Cooperative Extension System was established in 1914 through the Smith-Lever Act. Its mandate is specific and unambiguous: to take university agricultural research and deliver it in practical form to ordinary farmers across every county in the United States. There is an extension office in every American county, nearly 3,000 of them. Their explicit purpose is to ensure that what researchers discover in university test plots reaches the people who grow food. By the 1960s, the federal funding that kept those extension offices operating was deeply aligned with the priorities of commodity agriculture.
Commodity agriculture, the industrial production of corn, soybeans, beef, pork, and poultry at scale, is built entirely on purchased inputs. Seed purchased annually, synthetic fertilizer purchased seasonally, pesticide purchased per application, feed purchased continuously, veterinary pharmaceuticals purchased as needed. The Extension Office curriculum taught what commodity agriculture needed farmers to buy. Because the people funding agricultural education at scale were the people selling agricultural inputs at scale. Integrated polyculture pond farming requires none of those inputs after the initial $500 installation. A farmer who builds a productive pond stops purchasing protein from the industrial system permanently. The American industrial meat industry is currently valued at $200 billion annually. That industry has no structural incentive to fund the education of its own customers out of dependency. The Auburn findings were published. H.S. Swingle's research entered the academic record. Permaculture researchers, including Bill Mollison, documented the system in detail in his 1988 Permaculture, a Designer's Manual, drawing directly on both the Auburn data and the Chinese historical record. The knowledge circulated in alternative agricultural literature for decades, but it never entered the Extension Office curriculum at scale. No federal subsidy program supported pond installation the way commodity crop production has been subsidized continuously since the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933. No agricultural college developed a backyard polyculture curriculum the way they developed beef management and poultry production programs that aligned with industry purchasing patterns. The knowledge was not banned, it was not declared illegal, it was simply never funded. And in the American agricultural education system, the things that are never funded are the things that most farmers never learn. By the late 20th century, backyard ponds in America had been reclassified, not food production systems, decorative features, koi ponds for the wealthy, ornamental fountains. The protein system that had sustained more human beings throughout history than any other method had been quietly redesignated as landscaping. That redesignation did not require a conspiracy. It required only that the system replacing it had the funding and the infrastructure to make itself the only visible option, which it did, and which it still does. The documented record on integrated polyculture is not marginal or contested science. It is published, replicated, and institutionally recognized. Auburn University, H.S. Swingle, 1950s and 1960s, 350 pounds of harvestable fish protein per 1,000 square feet annually under basic management conditions, published in peer-reviewed fishery science literature. The comparison figure, a quarter-acre of cattle pasture producing approximately 200 pounds of beef annually with continuous purchased inputs, makes the yield differential impossible to dismiss. Aquatic research across multiple institutions. Aquatic plants in integrated pond systems remove up to 90% of the nitrogen waste produced by fish. The water stays clean without mechanical filtration. The fish stay healthy without chemical treatment. The plants grow without purchased fertilizer. The nitrogen cycle completes itself and has been completing itself in functioning polyculture systems for 4,000 years. Duckweed biology, documented across multiple studies. Under optimal conditions, duckweed doubles its biomass in less than 48 hours. The absorption rate is efficient enough that municipal wastewater treatment facilities use it as a primary nutrient removal mechanism. In an integrated pond system, ducks consume it as fast as it grows, a self-renewing food source that costs nothing to introduce and nothing to maintain. Khaki Campbell breed documentation, 280 to 340 eggs per year per duck, A flock of 3 produces 840 to over 1,000 eggs annually. Research documents that ducks with access to integrated pond ecosystems forage up to 30% of their nutritional needs from insects, aquatic plants, and small organisms, reducing purchased feed costs by nearly a third from the first season. FAO 2010 Aquaculture Development Ecosystem Approach to Aquaculture. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations documents traditional polyculture systems across Asia and their measurable superiority to industrial aquaculture in protein yield per unit of input. Publicly available, institutionally published, consistently unreferenced in American agricultural education. Journal of Aquaculture, 2019. Integrated duck, fish, plant polyculture systems in southern China produce 40% more protein per unit area than monoculture fish farming, with 60% lower nutrient pollution output. The 4,000-year-old system outperforms the industrial system designed to replace it by every measurable metric. UNESCO, 2005. The integrated rice fish farming systems of Qingtian County in Zhejiang Province, China, received designation as the world's first globally important agricultural heritage system. The designation criteria require that the system be actively functioning and demonstrably superior in sustainability to available alternatives. These ponds have been operating continuously for over 2,000 years. They received the designation not as a historical artifact, but as a living, producing, superior food system.
Here is what one properly established polyculture pond produces. Not projected, documented. The footprint is 1,000 square feet, 10 feet by 15 feet and 4 feet deep at center. Less space than a standard parking space. Less space than most garden plots. Fish, 300 to 350 pounds of harvestable protein annually. Channel catfish reaching 1 to 2 pounds within 18 months of stocking. Bluegill reaching harvestable size within 2 years, then reproducing independently. Stock once, harvest indefinitely without repurchasing. In warm climates, tilapia reach 1 pound in 5 to 6 months. A pond stocked with 50 tilapia fingerlings yields 40 to 50 pounds of harvestable fish within a single growing season. Eggs, 3 khaki Campbell ducks produce 700 to 900 eggs in year 1, approximately 60 to 75 eggs per month, more than most families consume. The surplus is the beginning of a barter economy that costs nothing to generate. Water management. A ring of cattails planted on the shallow shelf around the pond edge removes excess nitrogen and phosphorus from the water continuously, performing the function of a mechanical filtration system worth hundreds of dollars for free, permanently, while simultaneously producing an edible shoot harvested in early spring that has been a food source across wetland cultures globally for millennia. Duckweed introduced to the surface becomes a self-renewing duck feed and water filtration system within weeks of introduction. The ducks eat it. It regrows faster than they can consume it. It absorbs the nutrients their waste introduces. The loop closes. Setup cost: $400 to $600 total. Against a decade of purchasing protein from the industrial meat system, the return is measurable within the first year of harvest. After year 3, the fish are reproducing independently. The ducks are laying continuously. The plants are filtering without assistance. The nitrogen cycle is completing itself. You are no longer managing a system. You are harvesting from a living ecosystem that has woven itself into your land, the way Fan Li's pond wove itself into the shore of Lake Taihu 2,500 years ago. Here's the question that the Auburn data, the FAO documentation, the UNESCO designation, and 4,000 years of continuous productive operation have been building toward.
Why does the USDA Cooperative Extension System, which operates in every single county in the United States, whose explicit legislative mandate since 1914 has been to deliver agricultural research to ordinary farmers, and which has had access to H.S. Swingle's published findings for over 60 years, still not teach integrated polyculture pond farming at any meaningful scale? Every American county has an extension office. Every extension office has a mandate to teach food production. The Auburn findings are in the published record. The FAO documentation is publicly available. The UNESCO designation is 11 years old. The biology functions in every climate where water exists and sunlight reaches it. The gap is not knowledge. The research has been done. The gap is not access. A pond costs $500 to establish. The gap is not complexity. Fawn Lee documented the method clearly enough that it has been reproduced without institutional support across 4,000 years of human history. The gap is that a farmer who builds this pond stops being a customer of the $200 billion industrial meat system, and the agricultural education infrastructure in America was built by and for the system that needs that farmer to remain a customer. Fawn Lee understood this when he declined the king's reward and built a pond instead. The most dangerous thing a person can possess is a food system that does not require anyone's permission to function. That understanding is precisely why this one was never taught, and the people who needed it most, the ones for whom food independence was not an ideological position, but a daily survival question, were the ones most systematically denied access to the knowledge that would have given it to them. In Qingtian County, in Zhejiang Province in southeastern China, a specific agricultural system has operated without interruption for over 2,000 years. Rice paddies with carp living in the flooded fields. The fish eat insects and weeds that would otherwise damage the rice. Their movement through the water aerates the soil around the roots. Their waste fertilizes the rice without any purchased input. At the end of the growing season, the rice is harvested from above and the fish from below. 2 crops, 1 field, 0 purchased inputs beyond the initial fingerlings. During the Cultural Revolution, when traditional agricultural practices were actively suppressed across China in favor of collective industrial farming methods mandated by central policy, the communities of Qingtian maintained their rice-fish systems. The food security argument was too strong to overcome even by ideological pressure. When a traditional system demonstrably feeds more people more reliably than the replacement being offered, the people who depend on it find ways to keep it functioning. They did. In 2005, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization designated Qingtian's rice-fish system as the world's first globally important agricultural heritage system. The designation was not awarded for historical interest. It was awarded because the system was still actively producing food for living communities using methods that had been continuously refined over 2 millennia. Living proof that what was buried was never fully dead. In the United States, the knowledge survived through the permaculture movement. Bill Mollison's Permaculture, a Designer's Manual, published in 1988 and continuously in print for nearly 4 decades, documented integrated pond polyculture systems in detail, drawing directly from the Auburn University research and the Chinese historical record. The book has sold hundreds of thousands of copies. The knowledge it contains has been implemented quietly on homesteads and small farms across the country by people for whom food independence was not a trend but a necessity. The pond that Fawn Lee designed on the shores of Lake Taihu in 475 BC is still being built by different hands in different countries in different centuries. Because once you understand what the biology does when you give it the right conditions, the knowledge becomes impossible to fully suppress. It lives in the land itself. It waits for whoever is patient enough to ask what the water already knows. Here is what you can do with this information starting today. Find your low point. Walk your land after rain and find where water naturally collects. That is your pond location. The land is already telling you where it wants to hold water. Work with that signal, not against it. Mark out 1,000 square feet, roughly 10 feet by 15 feet. If you have clay soil, the pond can be sealed the traditional way, 6 inches of wet clay compacted and cured over 2 weeks. This method has worked continuously for 4,000 years. If your soil is sandy or rocky, use an EPDM rubber liner rated for 20 to 30 years at $1 to $2 per square foot. Stock in sequence. Plants first, cattails on the shallow edges, duckweed on the surface, submerged oxygenating plants in the deeper sections. Wait 4 weeks. Then 2 to 5 khaki Campbell ducks. Wait 1 month. Then 50 fingerlings per 1,000 gallons. Then observe for 6 months without interfering. The ecosystem is finding its balance. Let it. For species regulations, your state's Fish and Game website lists which species are legal for private pond stocking. Bluegill and channel catfish are legal in nearly every state. Tilapia require individual state verification. For the foundational knowledge, the Yang Yu Jing, Fan Li's original treatise, has been translated into English and is available through academic libraries. Bill Mollison's Permaculture, a Designer's Manual, remains the most comprehensive English-language treatment of integrated pond polyculture available and has been continuously in print since 1988. For living community connection, the Qingtian rice fish farming communities of Zhejiang Province maintain documentation of their methods through the FAO's globally important agricultural heritage system network, publicly accessible and the most thoroughly documented continuous polyculture record in existence. Somewhere in Qingtian County right now, a farmer is standing at the edge of a rice paddy watching carp move slowly through the flooded rows. The same movement, the same water, the same closed loop that Fan Li stood watching on the shores of Lake Taihu 2,500 years ago. The fish are eating the insects. The water is clearing. The rice is growing without fertilizer that anyone purchased. The system works the way it has always worked, for anyone patient enough to give it the right conditions and the time it needs to become itself. This is the Forgotten Roots Report. We find what was buried, document who kept it alive, and return it to the hands that need it. The next report opens a file on a root vegetable that fed Northern Europe through every famine for 5 centuries, then vanished from every farm on the continent within 20 years of industrial agriculture's arrival onto the scene. The clearing was documented, the replacement was funded. The root is still growing wild in the hedgerows. Subscribe now to stay embedded in the investigation. This archive does not close.